Well, thank you for that, Dennis. I appreciate it. I am indeed John Hinderaker from Powerline, filling in for Dennis today. It's going to be a fun 3 hours. We've got some terrific guests coming up. I want to start the show by just talking briefly about yesterday's biggest news story, which is the resignation of Andy Cuomo as governor of New York. And I think there's several features of that story that are kind of interesting. For one thing, we have the farewell speech that Governor Cuomo gave, in which he portrayed himself as a hero. And this is very typical of our times. You know, he goes out protesting his innocence. He says that this whole groping scandal is politically motivated. That was the phrase he used. He's been accused by something like 17 women, probably all of whom are Democrats. I'm a little unsure exactly how it's politically motivated. But he cast himself as in a kind of a heroic light because he didn't want his ongoing travails to be a distraction when the state of New York is facing so many important issues, and therefore he's doing everyone a favor by stepping down. That's the way he portrayed it himself, and his resignation was greeted very positively by his fellow Democrats, and Joe Biden, for example, stirred a little controversy when he welcomed the resignation, but he said that Cuomo did, quote, a hell of a job, close quote, as governor. Now, a lot of people would beg to differ with that, particularly New York residents who had aged parents and grandparents in nursing homes in that state. But I think one of the things going on here is that the Democrats are trying to put behind them a number of things here that they really don't want to talk about. And that's why we see Joe Biden. And by the way, am I the only one, when Joe Biden says Cuomo did a hell of a job as governor, am I the only one who's reminded of 2005 in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, when George W. Bush said of a guy named Brown, who at that time was the head of FEMA, Brownie, you're doing a heck of a job. And of course, not long thereafter, Brownie was out of his job. And the Democrats never let Bush forget that. I have a feeling that Biden's congratulations to Andy Cuomo are going to be forgotten a lot sooner. So what I think is going on here is that the Democrats really want to pretend that everything that's been going on here surrounding Governor Cuomo is just about a few misunderstandings between him and various women. And there's a number of things that they want us to forget. And of course, foremost is the disaster in New York State's nursing homes. And they want us to forget the investigation into whether Cuomo or his staffers actually committed a crime by lying to federal investigators about their nursing home policies. And then there's the way that the press fawned over Governor Cuomo. I mean, it was embarrassing, the things that they were writing about him as America's most popular politician, and he's the control freak that America needs at this point in his history. And of course, the ones who fawned most loudly of all were the people at CNN, including Cuomo's own brother. And here we take the scandal into the realm of journalism. It's just outrageous that night after night, CNN would have these puff piece interviews where their alleged reporter is interviewing his own brother, talking about what a terrific job Cuomo was doing as governor of New York. And yeah, there it was. Brownie, you're doing a heck of a job. I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one that that was reminded of that, but it certainly came to mind. Well, and then don't forget that Governor Cuomo actually received an Emmy. He got an Emmy for his press conferences where he would go on and talk about COVID. And the only reason for that was to stick it to Donald Trump, who at that time had been doing his own press conferences as president, talking about COVID. And so it's just another example of the entire liberal establishment coming together to push a narrative. And then, of course, we don't want to forget that Governor Cuomo got $5 million from a subsidiary of Penguin Random House to write a book about leadership, supposedly based on the terrific job that he did on COVID. All those things. Cuomo will keep the $5 million, but all of those things are going to be swept down the memory hole because they are embarrassing to the Democrats. Now, Democrats generally don't embarrass easy, but I think these things are all matters that they would rather we not be reminded of, and therefore Andy Cuomo has been hustled off the stage. And what it means for New York remains to be seen. But the Attorney General, Letitia James, reportedly is looking to get Cuomo's job. She wants to be governor, and she is one of a number of left-wingers in the Democratic Party in New York who think that Cuomo was too moderate. And it may well be that Cuomo's demise could mean that before too long, New York State will go full AOC. That remains to be seen. So anyway, I think there's some interesting features of yesterday's sudden but not surprising resignation of Governor Andy Cuomo. We are joined now, I think, have we got Steve on the line? Yeah, we are joined now by Steve Hayward, one of my partners in crime at Powerline. Steve, I don't even know how to introduce you these days. A professor at University of California at Berkeley, author of The Age of Reagan, as well as the just published biography of Stanton Evans. Anything else we should toss in there?
Well, only that I usually describe myself as an inmate at UC Berkeley, because that's more accurate.
All right, an inmate at UC Berkeley. And Steve, the thing I want to talk about for the next several segments, actually, is another big news story of the last couple of days, or allegedly big news story, and that is the release of the latest report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And, of course, this is their period. Is this report number 6, Steve, that they've done?
I think it's either 6 or 7. I've lost count, but it doesn't matter. They're all the same. So
yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is referred to in the press as though it was this kind of impartial committee of scientists, but really what it is the club. I mean, it's the cabal of people who are making their living off global warming hysteria. At least that's how I think of it. Is that too harsh?
Oh, no. They're very careful to select only a very narrow range of participants who are going to agree with the party line. That's absolutely correct.
And so the release of this report had the effect that was intended, really the only effect that was intended, and that is to generate a bunch of hysterical headlines around the world about how we're all doomed as a result of global warming. We only have so many years to save the planet. And this time they really mean it, though. This is report number 6 or 7. They've been saying the same thing for, 20 years or more. And so I guess my first real question for you, Steve, is what is in this report, and what is in this report that's new or that's different?
Yeah, I'm giggling because there's always a two-step involved with this. The full report, and by the way, this is only the first third. There'll be 2 more parts coming out early next year. But this is the part of the report that always gets the most headlines. It's supposedly on the science of climate change. This year, the full report is almost 3,000 pages long, which means no one will read it, let alone digest it. And what always gets the headlines is the UN always puts out about a 20-page summary for policymakers, they call it. And that's the one where you get things like it's code red for humanity, and we're running out of time, and the world's going to come to an end. And it turns out, if you get into the actual full science report itself, which I do periodically, I've only looked at a tiny little bit of this new one because who's going to read 3,000 pages? You find that what the media is saying and what the summary for policymakers that the bureaucrats write says doesn't always match up with what the science report says. So, I put it out a couple weeks ago on Powerline that Science Magazine, fully in the mainstream, quote-unquote, of the quote-unquote consensus, said, gosh, there are a lot of scientists who say there are problems with these computer climate models. And the real bombshell of that review was when somebody recently took the climate models and tried to plug in data from the past.
Hey, Steve, we're up against a hard break, but I want to pick this up. We'll be right back after these commercial messages with more on the climate models.
Here at Salem Media Group, we're delighted to welcome you back to your old habits and haunts. Nice to see you at our restaurants. We've been waiting a long time for you to return. Nice to see you at the salon, the post office, the flower shop. Nice to see you back in the office. Nice to see all those cars on the freeway again.
Yay! Hello, Bedford Falls!
For over a year, America has been fighting to get back to normal. This Salem radio station has been fighting right alongside you. Now we're back. You're back. It feels so good to be back.
Welcome back to the real.
Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
And I know so many people who are resistant to the vaccine. It's just a fact of life. And there are people in all walks of life, white people, black people, Hispanic people, members of the military, the healthcare profession. You know how many nurses, and dare I say doctors, physician's assistants, unwilling to get the vaccine? It's more than a little. So what do we do with them? What do we do with those people? In fact, that's been one of the most unreported stories of the whole crisis of this pandemic. Healthcare workers who are unvaccinated.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on the Larry Elder Show.
Stephen, let's pretend like you were president for a day. What do we do to get this economy back in shape?
So the first thing we do is we actually do exactly think of everything Biden has done and do exactly the opposite. And I'm not kidding, Carl. I mean, we do exactly the opposite of what Biden is doing. You know, we don't need $4 trillion of spending right now. We need to be, after a crisis is over, and COVID is basically over now thanks to Trump and the vaccine, usually after like World War II or after the Cold War, we actually cut spending. We need to be aggressively cutting government spending. By the way, government spending, you know this, Carl, where did this crazy idea come from that government spending stimulates? All the government spending stimulates is government. It doesn't. The only way, let me put it very simply, because this is really important. I know you know this as a businessman. The only way that the government can give you $1,000 is to take $1,000 away from me, right? It's a zero-sum game, and all we're doing is taking money away from producers and giving it to people who don't produce. That's that formula for disaster.
You know what? It's so funny that you mention that. I talk about that often on my show, and one of the things, it's frustrating to hear Biden talk about it, but it's even more, it's scary to me that people believe it, that there's such a lack of understanding when it comes to economics that it completely baffles me. It completely scares me that he could say the things that he says about inflation and just completely get away with it.
Now think about somebody like Joe Biden. What has Joe Biden done in his life? Well, he's never had a job. I mean, all he's done, he's been in government his whole life.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
And the whole point of it was to do comedy from a Christian conservative perspective that wasn't cheesy, that didn't make us the joke. Because
isn't it funny that we always have to start there?
Yeah,
we're doing it. It's really brilliant, but it's not.
The Dennis Prager Show. Sorry. Welcome back to the Dennis Prager Show. We are talking with Stephen Hayward about the just released UN IPCC report on the imminent demise of the Earth due to global warming. And Steve, before the break, you were just starting to explain that this entire global warming hysteria is based on model projections, but the scientists, the scientific portion of the IPCC report is starting to acknowledge that there are some really serious problems with those models. Let's pick it up there.
Yeah, this is hard to explain in simple terms, but I'll try. You know, there's a famous quote from the late James Q. Wilson, one of the most prominent conservative political scientists of the last generation. And he once said to social scientists, quit trying to predict the future. You can't even predict the past. And that turns out to be exactly true of climate modeling. The scientific community that works on this recently tried to backtest some of their models to data we've generated from thousands of years ago, and found that the models generated temperature predictions that were way off from what the temperature records were able to figure out actually were. So, come to the current report. And, you know, the problem with computer models is the old garbage in, garbage out. What do you put in the front end? Well, you have to put in an emissions projection. How much greenhouse gas emissions are we going to emit from fossil fuels over the next 70, 80 years? And the last few reports from the IPCC, the last one being, I think, 2014, had these very high projections of what they thought we were going to do over the next century as the world develops and grows and so forth. Well, as time has gone on, people look at those projections and say, those are totally unrealistic. And so the latest report, the one just out, in the science sections contains this sentence. I'll quote it from it. The likelihood of high emission scenarios is considered low in light of recent developments in the energy sector. The translation is, what we've been saying before is all wrong. And a few sentences further down, they say, what's most likely now is, I'll quote here, approximately in line with the medium scenarios. And I'm going for a long time about those scenarios and get very technical, but the point is, when you get into language, what you realize is they are drawing back from some of their scariest projections. And without those high emission scenarios, you can't get the disaster. In fact, now it really looks like, if you read the whole report, they say, by the way, we don't even, in fact, I'll quote it here, no likelihood is attached to the scenarios assessed in this report. That's a big climb back from the last report, which assessed a high likelihood for these high emission scenarios. So you can see the science, the real science of this, has actually gotten more modest. And now, if you read between the lines, they say, yeah, it looks like the worst case scenario might be 3 degrees of warming a century from now. That's assuming everything else is correct in these models, and leave that aside for now. You know, that's not the end of the world. It would make some changes, but that's an entirely manageable problem, even if the worst case comes true.
Well, and I think even some of the alarmist scientists now admit that the models have been running hot, and it's an obvious point, Steve, but one worth making. Models are not evidence. A model is a hypothesis. It's a hypothesis, and a model is proved either right or wrong by experience. If a model predicts that in the next 10 years we're going to have a 1.5 degree net change in temperature, and it doesn't happen, that means the model was wrong. And we've had these models around long enough now to be able to compare their projections with the actual temperature records, and they're wrong. I mean, they clearly are projecting temperatures that are too high. I mean, isn't that pretty plain?
Yeah, I think to be precise, what we ought to say is most of the models are projecting temperatures that are too high or likely to be too high. It is important to remember that there really isn't just one model or one projection. There's usually at any given time 40 or 50 different model projections grouped into families.
Yeah, that's right. And Steve, let's talk a little bit about what's really going on with the Earth's climate. Putting the projections to the side for the moment. In my opinion, you tell me if you think this is right or not. I think it's an important point. I mean, in my opinion, the only really reliable temperature record that we have is the satellite record, which is public, it is transparent. and it is not hasn't been tampered with, and it's not thrown off by things like the urban heat island effect and so on. And unfortunately, that record only goes back to the late 1970s. But A, do you agree that that is the only really reliable record we've got? And B, what does it show?
To reconstruct temperatures going back earlier that are interesting. But yeah, the satellite record is only 42 years old. It showed a significant amount of warming between roughly 1980 and 1998. And then it's been bouncing up and down within a range ever since then. And every time you hear, oh, this was the hottest year ever, which we've heard 3 or 4 times in the last decade, it turns out it's hotter by a couple 1/100ths of 1 degree. So the overall warming trend we saw for 20 years stopped about 20 years ago, and now it's been bouncing up and down in a range. So I think that's a significant point. And I'll mention, by the way, I actually know 2 of the scientists who developed that satellite program, John Christie and Roy Spencer, and they're both deeply skeptical of the alarmist climate change narrative.
Yeah, and rightly so, it seems to me. So we have not been seeing the kind of increase that the models, or some of the models, as you say, have been projecting. And I think that's one of the reasons why the alarmists have talked about climate change and extreme weather events. And one of the ironies here, I think, Steve, is that we have been living in an era of really benign weather for the most part, and relatively few adverse climate events.
So I think there's 2 points to be made about this. One is the data for the U.S. anyway, which has the best data because we've been at it the longest, is landfalling hurricanes and tornado activity have actually declined over the last 40 or 50 years. And then second, if you want to measure the problem in terms of human well-being, which is ultimately what's important for the whole planet, the number of deaths from climate-related extremes has declined by 95% in the last century. Well, why is that? Because of economic growth and technology. So, the best course, regardless of what you think about the risks in climate, the best course to safeguarding humanity is economic growth and technological progress, and not this hair-shirt agenda of telling people in Africa and poor people in Asia that they can't have electric light bulbs.
Yeah, one thing that occurs to me, Steve, is that it's been a while since certainly this country, and I think other major crop, agricultural sections of the world, have experienced really adverse weather, particularly droughts. And I think about it because right now the western half of the United States is experiencing drought conditions. We're seeing some of that even here in Minnesota, not so much to the south and to the east. But the fact is, droughts have been a fact of life throughout all of human history, and we've been very lucky in recent years not to have seen much in that respect.
Well, not only that, one of the big question marks of the climate models, and the models will tell you this, is they're divided about whether warming would increase drought or decrease it, or where, right? I mean, they'd be different in different parts of the world. And some projections think the southwestern U.S., where I live, which is now in a bad drought, might get more rainfall.
Let's leave it there,
world.
Steve, and come back after these messages. We'll be right back with more.
Don't you get tired of commercials screaming at you to buy gold now with inflated promises on future values? In an unregulated industry, you need honest, real experts to give you solid advice to protect your wealth and top picks on the best coins and bullion based on real-time data and historical trends. For example, as environmental policy becomes a hot topic, one precious metal that's been significantly undervalued for years is potentially set to surge. Nick Grovich, owner of AmFed Coin and Bullion, has long recommended this precious metal. Up to 600,000 ounces of this rare metal will be needed by 2030 to produce green hydrogen. Nick is doubling down on this pick, and you should too. Call Nick at AmFed Coin and Bullion to find out more. I've been friends with Nick for years, and he's my go-to guy when it comes to coins and bullion. I trust him. He is a good and very knowledgeable man. Call Nick at 800-221-7694, 800-221-7694. AmericanFederal.com. AmericanFederal.com. Not one mistake.
Trending now on the Charlie Kirk Show.
Well, according to the CDC's own documents, right here, Barnstable, or is it Barnstable? Whatever. County, Massachusetts. Outbreak. In all bold. No difference in mean CT values in unvaccinated and vaccinated cases. In fact, the vaccinated cases were 0.4% higher. That's the CDC's own data. That vaccinated Americans in Massachusetts, I'm just reading from the document, in Barnstable County, that the median among vaccinated was N equals 80. I'm not sure what that value represents, but 21.9. Unvaccinated, N equals 65, 21.5. I'm guessing that's how many people they were testing. I need to go look at what the values represent. It says here that risk of infection, reinfection with the Delta variant may be higher compared to the Alpha variant, but only if prior infection is 180 days earlier. It says this, that the Delta variant may cause more severe disease than the Alpha or the ancestral strains. So they're already going to now mandate indoor mask mandates. And in fact, certain sources that cover the White House very well, including Jack Posobiec, who has been wrong about almost nothing with his sources, say that lockdowns are coming to blue states in the next couple weeks.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com.
I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com for Town Hall. Democrats have doubled down on radical indoctrination in schools with their embrace of critical race theory. School boards and teachers unions have rushed to implement CRT into their curricula, in some cases while avoiding parental notification. Even as these education leaders refuse to reopen schools to children, they now plan to use their near monopoly on education to push this highly controversial ideology. It's already begun to backfire. Parents have begun demanding answers from school boards and campaigned to unseat their members. Political
Welcome back to the Dennis Prager Show. We're talking with Steve Hayward about the latest IPCC. Welcome back to the Dennis Prager Show. We are talking with Steve Hayward about the latest IPCC global warming report. And before we go any further, let's start this segment by taking a call. Let's go to Jeff in Minneapolis on line 2. Jeff, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, John, and I'm a longtime Powerline blog reader and really appreciate, John, your work, Steve, Scott's, and even sometimes Paul's.
All right.
But my question for Steve is, there's been a growing U.S. corporate obsession with making very bold environmental commitment statements. There's been an increasing number of very public CEO commitments to carbon neutrality. And even investment firms are building and promoting ESG-favored funds. What do you see as the impact of this type of ESG wokeness on U.S. businesses in the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, so I see this of a piece with corporate America also going whole in for, well, people call it woke capitalism, right? You've seen a lot of major corporations make not only statements, but large financial commitments to Black Lives Matter. I think the climate business is similar. However, one of the things that I notice is people are still going to drive their cars, and people are going to still want their lights to come on. And that is going to mean, as a practical matter, we're going to be using fossil fuels for a long time to come. So, what I think is this is a little bit like the war on the tobacco companies back in the late 1990s. And you know what? Yeah, smoking's declined, but people still smoke. And if you had bought stocks in the tobacco companies in the late 1990s when everyone thought they were finished, you'd have made a lot of money because they all bounced back. And I think that's true of energy companies. I'm not an investment advisor, but I observe that even with the run-up in oil prices and the energy sector surging on the stock market, the old-fashioned energy sector is still at its lowest point as a share of the S&P 500 in something like 50 years. That looks like a buying opportunity to me. Ultimately, markets speak louder than politics, although sometimes in the short run, politics can distort markets.
Hey, Jeff, thanks for that call. Steve, I want to go back to something you were saying just before the break, and that is that global warming alarmists are not united in terms of whether the alleged climate change is going to involve more rain, or less rain, which seems like an important point. So in the western United States, we're seeing drought conditions. On the other hand, they've got flooding in England and in Italy and in Germany. And I suppose the alarmists want to have it both ways. And in the U.S., they'll say, oh, look at the drought, that's climate change. And then in Europe, they'll say, look at all the rain, that's climate change. But they really can't have it both ways, can they?
Well, they try to have it both ways. I mean, when you point out record cold, which happens a lot lately, the climatistas, as I always like to call them, they always rush to say, weather is not climate. And that's true. But then whenever you have an extreme heat wave, they say, see, this proves, or some other thing, a bad storm, a flood, and so forth. One of the biggest problems in understanding the climate system is the oceans, which are obviously massive, and obviously the biggest heat sinks in the whole climate system. And although we're getting better at gathering data, we still can't predict ocean behavior very well. And so the problem with drought and also hurricanes is if you have a high El Nino, a warming current in the Central Pacific, you tend to get higher rainfall by a lot in the western United States. And at the same time, you have lower hurricane activity out of the Atlantic. Flip that around. This has been true for 20 years. If you have what they call La Nina, which is no big heat spike in the Central Pacific, that's when you get more hurricane activity on average in the Atlantic and droughts in the Southwest. So, depending on, if this continues to be random as it's been for, forever, then there's no way of predicting how things might go over, say, even a decade time scale. But if one condition or the other became more predominant, it would make a huge difference in how you would want to adapt and prepare for weather conditions. But we still have no grasp of that and no way of predicting that with any reliability right now.
Steve, we got just 1 minute to go before a break, but let me just get your thoughts on this. It seems to me, the alarmists are always telling us it's a race against time to save the climate. I think they're racing against time. I think that with every year that goes by and their doomsday predictions fail to materialize, more and more people are getting skeptical about whether these folks really know what they're talking about. Do you think can we be optimistic enough to think that this whole hysteria is going to fade away here before too long?
Well, I won't say before too long. I think it's already faded some. It shows up in public opinion surveys. People always rank climate change at the bottom of the list of things that worry them. And I think in general there's apocalypse fatigue, as I call it, and set in quite a while ago. And I think as a general matter, the scientific, I think the whole COVID business is another example of this.
Hey, we got to go to a break, Steve, but we'll be right back after these messages.
Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
And if you work in a good restaurant, they make great money. It's not something to be embarrassed about. It's not something to be ashamed about. But this is what the left does. I'm telling you, we're dealing with elites in the White House now. We're dealing with people, a lot of people that haven't had to get their hands dirty, that look down upon other Americans. As a matter of fact, and I'll get to this as well, rural Democrats are too scared to mention their party affiliation. And they're too scared to mention their party affiliation because you have elites like Joe Biden who just cut this man down. This man, God knows how many people this particular gentleman employs, how many jobs that restaurant creates for people. And restaurants operate on extremely thin margins. For those of you that don't know, it is extremely hard to make a restaurant successful. So Joe Biden said, you know what, that American dream, that stinks. So people are leaving. They're going to look for better things. They're going to look for better opportunities. They're going to look for better pay. Hey, why don't you pay your people more? Basically, that's what he was. Well, actually, that's what he said. What you have is a president that's not even empathetic. A president that doesn't care about the little man. A president that's, hey, I'm just an elite. You're just a peon. Come on, man. That business doesn't matter. That business doesn't matter. You think this is a man that can fix an economy? When he looks at a man that's living the American dream or was living the American dream and says, you know what? Your business stinks.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
We've had 11 homicides in the last 13 days,
Yep.
But 0 deaths with COVID. And,
Maybe they should ban homicides, Phil.
Yeah, right. Well, or at least maybe have a little bit more vigorous enforcement of the existing laws against them. But look, I mean, it's just completely bizarre. I looked up the most recent percentage of emergency room visits. They post every couple of days that had COVID in the District of Columbia, and it was 0.25%, which has got to be like one person, basically, that showed up at an emergency room. And, but the CDC says mask. The Democratic mayor says absolutely, we're on board. A couple days later, it comes into effect, and I expect other liberal areas will follow suit because there doesn't need to be any basis in the metrics or the data or the facts of the science. The play.
So let's talk about this for a second. So can you confirm or deny, or do you have any other visibility that apparently this insane reversal? We've been told by Biden, by Fauci, if you're vaccinated, you don't need a mask. Now you do, perhaps for the rest of eternity. That this decision is based apparently on an unpublished, unpeer-reviewed publication from India about a vaccine that you can't even get here in America.
Yeah, and it's actually even better than that because they didn't even understand the study, because in the CDC slide deck, they refer to it as a study in healthcare professionals when in fact it was a study in simulated persons in a laboratory. It was not.
Your show. We're talking with Steve Hayward about climate change. And if you want to get on the air, the number to call is 877-243-7776. That's 877-243-7776. Let's start this segment with a call. Rusty in Bakersfield, California. Rusty, welcome to the program.
How you doing this morning? Good, thank you. So my point I want to make real quick is, and I've been working with computer models for over 40 years, is, when we're trying to prove a hypothesis, to prove them right, we try to field verify it. We do a sensitivity analysis on the variables. But my issue with the CO2 climate models is you can't prove them wrong. And that's one of the things we do with models, is try to prove them wrong, because if we can, we go back to the drawing board. But with the CO2 climate models, maybe 1,000 years from now, 10,000, we could prove them right or wrong. But as of today, there's no way to do that.
Well, there's no way to do it, and they'll never admit that they're wrong. They'll just say, oh, well, we got to tweak this, or, oh, that was the heat is hiding deep in the oceans, or, they don't really consider these models to be falsifiable. Steve, is that a fair statement?
Oh, yeah, that's absolute. Rusty's absolutely right about this. I'll just say, I know one a quite prominent physicist. I won't say his name because this is a private conversation, but he's been deeply involved in this world for quite a long time. And he's neutral on the whole climate change business because he says, I don't think the models can ever get it right. I think it's just too complex a problem for our current level of knowledge and computing power. You know, all these models run basically on these Cray supercomputers that take quite a long time to do. And with that many variables, I mean, I'm no expert on this. I've tried to talk to some. It seems to me that it's always going to be a movable feast.
All right, thanks, Rusty, for that call. Steve, I want to ask you one more question on this topic and then move on to something completely different. And that question is this. I am really concerned that the big tech companies, the social media platforms, are going to use this latest IPCC report, even though it really adds nothing new or important. But I'm afraid they're going to use it as an excuse to shut down debate on climate change on the internet, as they have done with COVID and with the 2020 election. What do you think about that?
Oh, it's already happening. I mean, I've seen a couple of examples already of Twitter removing some tweets that quote some of the things I already quoted and other things from the main report. In other words, and that's because, so by the way, you know, the headline, which says, you know, it's Code Red for Humanity, the headline could be, good news, the extreme scenario that the IPCC saw most likely in 2013 is now judged low likelihood. That's what those passages I read and several others mean. That's not the press coverage. But if you tweet that out and link it to the report, you have a good chance now of being struck down. I think it's absolutely correct that we have this orthodoxy across the board. It's on gender identification. It's on COVID. It's on race questions. That there's now a narrow orthodoxy that is increasingly enforced by the tech companies. Quite right.
Steve, I want to ask you about something completely different now, and that is your recent trip to Hungary. And the fact that I think you just shortly preceded Tucker Carlson's recent trip to Hungary. Talk about that a little bit, if you will. What was the reason for your being there, and what was your experience like?
Yeah, well, I heard, I was there about 3 weeks ago, I think, and I heard that Tucker was coming, but they wanted to keep it quiet because Tucker wanted to spring it on people, which he did. And the left absolutely freaked out last week when Tucker showed up for his nightly show from Budapest. And I think, let us say right off that Tucker Carlson has really replaced Rush Limbaugh as the leading voice for conservatives in getting under the skin of the left. So I was not surprised at the freak out, although it was bigger than I imagined. So here's the point about Hungary. It's I went to visit John O'Sullivan, my old friend and longtime editor of National Review years ago. He's been inviting me to come over forever. And to give a lecture to the group we assembled there under the Danube Institute on what is going on in America. So I was there to talk about America with them, because I'm no expert on Hungary, but I do know this from talking to people there and reading a few things, is that Hungary and its ruling party and its Prime Minister Viktor Orban are actually determined to defend Western civilization, and that's what's got the left in such an uproar, and the European Union. So he's done things like, ban gender studies in Hungarian universities. I wish some of our universities would take that step. He's been tough on immigration. He's not going to take thousands of refugees and migrants, but just because Germany demands him to do it. And so there's some problems. I think the allegations of corruption are serious. On the other hand, I wish our media would apply the same standard to, the Clinton Foundation, just for starters. Or Andrew Cuomo's book deal. I think you mentioned that earlier. So anyway, this is fun to watch, that this tiny little country in Eastern Europe has got the American left and some never-Trumpers on the right completely bent out of shape, which I kind of like.
So the claim that the left just recklessly throws around with respect to Hungary is that this is a fascist government, that Orban is a fascist leader. I mean, what is that based on? Is there any basis for it?
Well, Orban has made some actually pretty thoughtful speeches criticizing what he calls liberal democracy in the West. By the way, his critique is not unique to him, but that's a long story. And saying maybe we ought to give illiberal democracy a try. Well, that's just waving red flag to a bull. I think his position is actually pretty coherent and interesting. I'll just give one example. There is a monument in downtown Budapest. I was near where I was staying. And it's a monument to the victims of the Holocaust in Hungary. It's very controversial because Hungary really collaborated with the Nazis and handed over a lot of Jews. But in front of it is this sort of a wire line with statements of protest against the monument. I don't know when the monument went up, but my point is, a truly fascist country would not allow that kind of a dissent to be displayed in public. So, I mean, I think the critics are completely overwrought, and I don't think it reflects very well on on their grasp of reality. I'm all for Hungary right now. I'm very excited about the place.
Well, everything I hear about it is terrific as a place to visit and as a place to live. We are going to go to a break. When we return, we're going to take Jim's call from Minneapolis and more here on the Dennis Prager Show.
Trending now on the Charlie Kirk Show.
Universal masking is going to be mandatory for source control and prevention. But most amazingly, in the new CDC leaked documents that we have here on our program, is that they model the vaccine only being 75 to 85% effective. That's their own internal modeling. Is that a vaccine or is that a therapeutic? Have you ever heard of a vaccine only being 75 or 85% effective? That's their own modeling. That's their own assumptions. And it says here, given higher transmissibility and current vaccine coverage, universal masking is essential to reduce transmission of the dental variant. Basically, they're saying, look, you want to talk about people who are sowing vaccine hesitancy? You want to talk about people that are sowing discord and losing trust in the vaccine? It's the Center for Disease Control. Joe Biden and the federal government is now running interference at a very aggressive pace. Cut 89. Joe Biden says, at my direction, all federal personnel and visitors to federal buildings will have to do the same. Cut 89.
Who live in areas with substantial or high case rates will follow the mask guidance that's being laid down by the CDC. And at my decision, my direction, all federal personnel and visitors to federal buildings will have to do the same thing.
Every single building. Alan Dershowitz, a man I have a lot of respect for, is just so wrong on this, it's hard to even put into words. Cut 91, Alan Dershowitz says, and I'd love to have him on our podcast and describe this, because he's a civil liberty guy.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
We have vaccine mandates for federal workers. Nancy Pelosi says masks are back. You're going to be arrested if you don't wear them in Congress. When is this going to end, Phil?
You know, it's I don't know when it's going to end. We've got the masks are mandatory again in Washington, D.C. As of 5 a.m. Tomorrow morning, which is very interesting because it's been 13 days since the District of Columbia last reported a death with COVID. We've had 11 homicides in the last 13 days, but 0 deaths with COVID. And,
maybe they should ban homicides, Phil.
Yeah, right. Well, or at least maybe have a little bit more.
Welcome back to the Dennis Prager Show. We're talking with Steve Hayward. We've got a short segment here to end the hour. Let's go to a phone call. Jim from Minneapolis on line 1. Jim, welcome to the program.
Good afternoon, John.
Hi.
I'm calling because I think the way that the environmental programs of the administration are being sold are crazy. First of all, they're talking about doing things domestically in the United States are going to have an impact on the whole world, and of course there are no walls between China and the United States, and so there's nothing to stop that. And in China right now, they're building 3 coal-fired power plants every single month, and in India about the same number. And basically what's going on, no matter how much we spend here, basically the Chinese are going to benefit from basically having us make up for their new coal-fired plants, and they'll be more competitive than we are right now. There'll be no impact on the nation at all, because as long as we let these third world countries build coal-fired plants while we're shutting ours down.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, Jim, too, because China makes all the solar panels now using slave labor, and they also use coal-fired plants for the electricity to make our solar panels. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Steve Hayward, comment on that?
Oh, God, I could go all day about this, but since time is short, I'll just say, yeah, China's brilliant. They're selling us our solar panels and a lot of wind power stuff and our batteries for our Teslas. What are they doing? Well, Jim just said it. They're building coal-fired power plants. Also, add this. I think there's about 25 nuclear power plants under construction around the world right now, and 20 of those are in China. So they're serious about energy, and they're also serious about selling us whatever foolishness we want to buy.
Let's thank you for that call, Jim. Let's go to Maria in Granada Hills, California. Maria, we've got just about a minute.
Okay, very good. Just real quick, these computer models, yes, they can be twisted and falsified. With so much press hyperventilating about this, we don't get the clear picture. We need point, counterpoint. We need true scientists and experts coming to the table without being censored. For example, Fauci sold us a bill of goods on the Imperial College computer model of predictions. We have to be very careful about directing policy on models and not hearing the whole story. Thank you.
Amen, sister. Amen, sister. Steve, just very briefly, it seems to me this is part of the whole thing about the rest of us all have to defer to the experts, right?
Well, not only the experts, but the herd mentality in the media. I mean, remember that the media swooned over Andrew Cuomo as recently as 3-4 months ago. Look where he is now. And as far as the science on COVID or climate or all the rest, as I said earlier, there's now... So Maria lives in Granada Hills. I think the Los Angeles Times quite a while ago said they will no longer even consider letters to the editor that dissent about climate change.
Yeah, all right. Steve Hayward, thank you for being on the Dennis Prager Show. We'll be back after these messages.
Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
It's time for the fearless. There's no time for the meek. This is America's moment. What's taking place in our schools, the crime in our cities, all of these things that we can see unraveling this most exceptional nation. It's time for the real believers and the real conservatives to step forward and be absolutely fearless in doing so.
But I think a lot of Americans have woken up, and so we don't even know what is going on the grassroots level because you can't keep track of everything. But I think people are rising up, and they're looking for folks like you and the handful of others in Congress, and they're saying we can no longer do business as usual. But I mean, 10 years ago, you were not thinking like this.
No, you nailed it. You absolutely nailed it. And by the way, I can give you 2 data points from the last 48 hours. I was in southwest Missouri at the Ashcroft family farm. It was a picnic outdoor, poured rain right about an hour before the picnic. Nobody left. They left. They gave me a chance. They gave former Attorney General Ashcroft a chance to talk about the Bible and the America and what we were all going to go do. These people were on fire to take back. And I had people come up and say, I never thought I'd run for city council, and I'm going to do it. And I had a couple law enforcement who said, I didn't have any interest in actually being the sheriff, but our sheriff won't enforce the rules. I'm going to go do that. No, this is different. I was in Iowa at an event that was very similar to that. And people are engaged in their civic life, in their churches, in their community in ways that I have not seen. I've been at this now 9-10 years from the time I first lost my mind and ran for Congress when Obama was the president and we had to throw Nancy out the last time. Who'd have believed we'd have to throw her out of speakership again? But here we are, and this is a moment where our people are being tested, they're being challenged, And my observation is people are rising to that challenge.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe today at rumble.com. Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
Universal masking is going to be mandatory for source control and prevention. But most amazingly, in the new CDC leaked documents that we have here on our program, is that they model the vaccine only being 75 to 85% effective. That's their own internal modeling. Is that a vaccine or is that a therapeutic? Have you ever heard of a vaccine only being 75 or 85% effective? That's their own modeling. That's their own assumptions. And it says here, given higher transmissibility and current vaccine coverage, universal masking is essential to reduce transmission of the Delta variant. Basically, they're saying, look, you want to talk about people who are sowing vaccine hesitancy? You want to talk about people that are sowing discord and losing trust in the vaccine? It's the Center for Disease Control. Joe Biden and the federal government is now running interference at a very aggressive pace. Cut 89. Joe Biden says, at my direction, all federal personnel and visitors to federal buildings will have to do the same. Cut 89.
Who live in areas with substantial or high cases rates will follow the mask guidance that's being laid down by the CDC. And at my decision, my direction, all federal personnel and visitors to federal buildings will have to do the same thing.
Every single building. Alan Dershowitz, a man I have a lot of respect for, is just so wrong on this, it's hard to even put into words. Cut 91, Alan Dershowitz says, and I'd love to have him on our podcast and describe this, because he's a civil liberty guy.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
We have vaccine mandates for federal workers. Nancy Pelosi says masks are back. You're going to be arrested if you don't wear them in Congress. When is this going to end, Phil?
You know, it's I don't know when it's going to end. We've got the masks are mandatory again in Washington, D.C. As of 5 a.m. Tomorrow morning, which is very interesting because it's been 13 days since the District of Columbia last reported a death with COVID. We've had 11 homicides in the last 13 days,
yep.
But 0 deaths with COVID. And,
maybe they should ban homicides, Phil.
Yeah, right. Well, or at least maybe have a little bit more vigorous enforcement of the existing laws against them.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe today at rumble.com.
Don't you get tired of commercials screaming at you to buy gold now with inflated promises on future values? In an unregulated industry, you need honest, real experts to give you solid advice to protect your wealth and top picks on the best coins and bullion based on real-time data and historical trends. For example, as environmental policy becomes a hot topic, one precious metal that's been significantly undervalued for years is potentially set to surge. Nick Grovich, owner of AmFed Coin and Bullion, has long recommended this precious metal. Up to 600,000 ounces of this rare metal will be needed by 2030 to produce green hydrogen. Nick is doubling down on this pick, and you should too. Call Nick at AmFed Coin and Bullion to find out more. I've been friends with Nick for years, and he's my go-to guy when it comes to coins and bullion. I trust him. He is a good and very knowledgeable man. Call Nick at 800-221-7694, 800-221-7694, AmericanFederal.com, AmericanFederal.com. Not one mistake.
Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
Well, according to the CDC's own documents, right here, Barnstable, or is it Barnstable? Whatever. County, Massachusetts. Outbreak. In all bold. No difference in mean CT values in unvaccinated and vaccinated cases. In fact,
welcome back to the Dennis Prager Show. I'm John Hinderaker from Powerline, filling in for Dennis today. And if you want to get on the air, the number to call is 877-243-7776. And we are joined now on the Dennis Prager Show by Robert Bryce. Robert has just recently published his sixth book. He's an expert on energy. His book is titled A Question of Power, Electricity and the Wealth of Nations. He's also produced a feature-length documentary film titled Juice, How Electricity Explains the World. It's an absolutely terrific documentary. You can find it on iTunes, Amazon Prime, and other streaming platforms. And Robert has just recently published a paper for Center of the American Experiment titled Not in Our Backyard. Robert, thanks for being on the program.
Happy to be with you, John.
Robert, you've been writing about wind and solar energy and their place in our energy future, and you've got a really interesting and unique take on this issue, and your basic belief is that land use turns out to be the binding constraint that is going to prevent those energy sources from ever really becoming substantial. Explain to our listeners what you mean by that.
Sure. Well, the fundamental problem with renewables, and let's be clear, renewables are very popular. Some 70% of people polled by Gallup say they want more wind. Some 80% they want more solar. But these aren't the people that have to live near 500 or 600 foot high wind turbines. They're not the people who have, dozens of acres or hundreds or even thousands of acres of solar panels next to their homes. So what we've seen over the last 7 years, and I started tracking this just on my own and keeping a spreadsheet, there have been over 300 communities from Maine to Hawaii since 2015 who've rejected or restricted wind projects. And now we're seeing similar kind of backlash against solar as well. And the problem, John, is fundamental. It's about basic physics. It's the power density problem, and it's one we can discuss more. But the fundamental problem with renewables, and there are many of them, including their incurable intermittency, the critical minerals required, copper, steel, neodymium, praseodymium, rare earths, cobalt, etc. But the fundamental problem is just they take up too much land. And so they're already running into these limits at the very same time the Biden administration and the Sierra Club and the usual suspects are saying, oh, well, we need to go all renewables. Well, they're not looking at first principles. And one of the first principles would be to say, where are we going to put it?
You mentioned power density. Let's just elaborate on that a little bit, Robert, because this is really the starting point for the whole thing, isn't it? I mean, a nuclear power plant or a coal-fired power plant, yeah, they're good-sized buildings, right? But I mean, it's a building, and it will power, a big chunk of a state. And wind and solar are just not like that.
Well, exactly. And so in the film, and you were kind to mention it, John, and I just did want to mention as well, I was pleased to do this report, the Not in Our Backyard, for the Center of the American Experiment, but I'd be remiss in not mentioning that I'm also now a research fellow at the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity in Austin, where I'm really focusing on the cost of electricity and cost of energy. But this is about basic physics and fundamental math. There's nothing secret here. What is the fundamental problem with wind and solar? It's low power density. What is power density? It's a measure of energy flow that can be harnessed from a given area, volume, or mass. Well, what we're really concerned with when it comes to electricity generation is how much area does it take? How much land does it take? And you were kind to mention the film in Juice, and I mentioned it in my book as well. I went to the Indian Point Energy Center in Buchanan, New York, which was tragically shuttered. The last reactor was shuttered in April. The power density of that nuclear plant when it was operating was 2,000 watts per square meter. They had 2,000 megawatts of generation capacity that ran at 90% capacity factor or more on a power plant that covered 1 square kilometer. To achieve that same output, just in terms of we're talking about watt hours, the same energy output, you need 1,300 or 1,500 square kilometers of wind turbines. And the amazing thing is that in states like New York, wind energy, and states like California, and states like Vermont, the bluest states in America, you cannot site wind turbines because they're so unpopular. So there's this fundamental binding constraint that the Democrats of Sierra Club will not discuss, but this is the fundamental problem.
In your paper, Not in Our Backyard, Robert, you've got an eye-opening fact. You do the math on how much land it would take if we were really going to try to meet our electricity resources with wind power, and the result is just stunning. I think there's a couple of states you'd have to dedicate to it.
Exactly right. I'm pleased you brought that up, John. But yes, so there are two different analyses that have been done on this. One by Václav Smil, who's a professor at the University of Manitoba and has been a prolific author on energy issues. And in his 2010 book, Energy Myths and Realities, he did some calculations on what would be required to meet existing electricity demand in the United States, which is roughly 4,000 petawatt hours per year, if we were just going to use wind. And the same thought exercise was done in 2018 by two researchers at Harvard, Lee Miller and David Keith, and they came up with the same figure. And what is that number? So again, to meet existing electricity demand, forget about transportation, residential, industrial energy needs, just to meet existing electricity needs in America would require 900,000 square kilometers covered with nothing but wind turbines. And that's roughly 2 times the size of the state of California. I mean, you can't cite wind projects in California today. It was just a few weeks ago the Shasta County Commission, the county commission in Shasta County, California, rejected one of the only wind projects that's pending in California. So the idea that we're going to set aside 2 entire Californias, or even 1, for wind turbines in the United States is absolute crazy town. And yet, we see the same rhetoric coming from, unfortunately, from the Biden administration, from top leaders in the Biden administration, even from the IPCC report the other day saying, we have to go all in on renewables. There just isn't enough land.
Another data point that you have in your Not in Our Backyard paper is the amount of transmission lines. They cite wind turbines in rural areas where it's relatively windy, but of course that's not where the electricity is going to be consumed. And so I think you've got a figure in your paper of 240,000 miles of transmission lines that you would have to build in addition to devoting an area twice the size of California?
Well, and this is true. I appreciate you bringing that up, and that's exactly right. And it's one of the things that's so stunning about so many of these academic studies that have been published in the last few years. And now I'm speaking one about specifically that was published by Princeton University. Got a lot of notice in the New York Times and The Economist. This is a bold and ambitious model, but it's achievable. Oh, really? A few years ago, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory published their own data to get to 90% renewable electricity in the United States would require roughly doubling the amount of high voltage transmission lines in the United States. Well, that's a real problem because you can't build effectively interstate high voltage transmission in the United States. Over the past decade, there's been effectively 0 miles of interstate high voltage transmission. So I use the analogy of, compare it to Dakota Access or Keystone XL, the difficulty of building pipelines underground is incredible. I mean, you see this friction all over. But imagine trying to put that same pipeline 200 feet in the air, where a whole lot of people are going to see it. It's going to come across their land. But effectively, that's what these big high-voltage transmission projects are. They're carrying electricity, not oil or gas, but they're pipelines. And so, I mean, it's just the lack of critical thinking and then critical analysis on these all renewable fables. It's truly gobsmacking.
And for those who don't have these numbers in mind, 240,000 miles of high voltage transmission lines is almost enough to go around the world 10 times. It's not going to happen, Robert. It's not. We're not going to devote an area twice the size of California to wind turbines. We're not going to build 240,000 miles of transmission lines. This whole thing is a fantasy. We've got just 30 seconds, Robert.
Well, thanks. Yeah, you're right. It is all a fantasy. But I would encourage people to look at the report on the Center of the American Experiments website. There's also a database that we publish, and I just updated it. 312 different communities across the country have rejected or restricted wind projects since 2015. The numbers are real. The facts are the facts, and people need to be aware of them.
We're going to be back with more from Robert Bryce after these messages. And we've got John in Chicago holding. We're going to take your call, John, to Robert Bryce after we return from these messages.
Trending now on the Charlie Kirk Show.
So they're already going to now mandate indoor mask mandates. And in fact, certain sources that cover the White House very well, including Jack Posobiec, who has been wrong about almost nothing with his sources, say that lockdowns are coming to blue states in the next couple weeks. Did you know that 5 people in Washington, D.C. died from COVID in the last week, and 11 people died from homicide? On average, we have 1,800 people that die of heart disease every single day in America. Why are we allowing these people to now get us into another state of panic?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
And then you want it to fit better. So one of the ways you could do it, if you would like to, is put a cloth mask over, which actually here and here and here, where you could get leakage in, is much better contained.
Are you a double masker, Dr. Fauci? It looked like you are.
Now, Alicia, I think, probably has a good reason to reject her doctor's explanation that that's the guy that we should all listen to. Matt Taibbi, in this report, or his column that I saw at New York Post, said, he writes, PolitiFact, which now basically exists to deflect criticism from the Biden administration, rated false the claim that Biden and Harris actually had reservations about the safety of the vaccines.
But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it.
Matt Taibbi says PolitiFact's excuse is that the then candidates, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, were raising questions not about the vaccines themselves, but about then President Donald Trump's rollout of the vaccines.
But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it.
PolitiFact said it's false that Kamala Harris had reservations about the vaccines. Matt Taibbi says, wait a minute, PolitiFact says it's false. What the hell does that mean? That it's okay to have reservations, not just about the White House, but about the CDC, FDA, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Moderna, and every other institution involved with the vaccine effort if you don't like or trust the president?
But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
you're going to censor yourself in deference to that power that's above you, that's telling you what you can and can't say, then you are the joke. You're not making jokes. You are the joke. Comedians, in our situation, what we look at is what we're doing. We're often accused. We're lately have been accused of punching down. We're punching back. We're not punching down. This is a situation where conservatives are literally on the ropes in the culture battle.
Yeah.
And they're defending themselves against this top-down attack, this top-down tyranny from progressive ideology that's coming from celebrities, it's coming from corporations, it's coming from politicians.
Yeah.
We're not punching down. We're punching back at that stuff.
So how big has the Babylon Bee? Like, it's grown dramatically, but give us some numbers so we have a sense of where you've come from in the last 4 years.
Well, so in the last 4 years, we've crossed.
Welcome back to the Dennis Prager Show. We are talking with Robert Bryce about land use constraints on the use of wind and solar energy. Let's take a call or two. Let's go to John in Chicago on line 1. John, welcome to the program. John, you're on the air.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, please talk.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we apparently have a problem with John. Let's go to Ron in Bloomington, Minnesota on line 2. Ron, welcome to the program.
Well, hopefully I can talk. My question is, what's the longevity of a wind turbine or a solar panel, and then what do we do with all the junk after it passes its regular lifestyle or life longevity?
Well, Ron, I'll just jump in here, John. But yeah, that's a great question. What we've seen already, in fact, I've just in the last couple of weeks, I drove from my home in Austin to Denver and went through Sweetwater, Texas. And what did I pass? A huge graveyard full of used wind turbine blades that apparently cannot be recycled, and so they're being landfilled. There was also a recent report that came out of the Harvard Business Review talking about the massive amount of tonnage. It was in the millions of tons of waste solar panels that are going to have to be landfilled, and many of those solar panels contain toxic materials. So these issues around so-called clean, green energy, they're a myth. Every form of energy production has a cost, and what we're finding now as we get further down the road with wind and solar is that this is not free energy. It's not necessarily even clean energy because they have a cost, particularly when it comes to the disposal and the end of life.
And I think we're finding that most wind turbines only last about 20 years, which, of course, is far, far less than conventional power sources. Ron, thanks for that call. So, Robert, I want to make sure that we have time to talk about an important aspect of your American Experiment report, and that is, why is it that it's so difficult to cite wind and solar projects? Why is it that where you try to put them, residents rise up and are opposed? What are the problems that people are seeing with having these projects nearby?
Well, let me start with one issue, John, that has gotten far too little attention. It's one that I've been reporting on now for more than a decade, and it's the health impacts of wind turbines. And it is remarkable to me, and I've been in journalism. I've never had a real job. I've been a journalist for more than 30 years, and I'm stunned, truly, by the lack of real coverage of the issue of the noise pollution from wind turbines. And I've interviewed people all over the world who've had wind turbines built near their homes, some of whom have had to move out of their houses. There are numerous reports in rural media outlets across the country and around the world of people having wind turbines built near their homes and suffering ill health effects, including sleeplessness, which is a serious health problem. So that's one of them, and that is a real and serious issue, and the health impacts have been documented in numerous studies, many of which I cite in the report. But the other ones are ones that you would be naturally expect. Concerns about property values, concerns about view sheds, concerns about tourism in their neighborhoods. One of the most recent examples of this is Madison County, Iowa, famous for the bridges of Madison County, right, the wooden-covered bridges. Well, in December of last year, the county commission passed a ban on new wind turbines in the county because Mid-American Energy, a subsidiary of Berkshire Hathaway, was planning to put in a big wind project. Well, I've interviewed the county commissioner. They said, we don't want this. It's going to hurt tourism in our county. And what happened to Madison County? They immediately got sued by Mid-American Energy. If this were the oil and gas industry doing this, it would be front page news in the New York Times. The New York Times will not cover the backlash against the wind business, even in New York State, where the backlash has probably been as vociferous and as nasty as any state in the country. But people, I guess the fundamental issue, the way I'd answer your question, John, is people care about what happens in their neighborhoods. And this idea, they're NIMBYs. The idea of a NIMBY is a slur. The idea that people don't care about what happens in their regions is just flat wrong. Everyone cares about it. But what's happening is that these big renewable projects are being put into the poorest counties in each of the respective states. In New York, the projects are only going into poor counties. They're not putting these projects in Westchester County. They're not putting them in Malibu because rich people can fight them and poor people don't have the resources to fight them.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Robert. But the good news in your report is a lot of people are fighting them successfully. And so we've got this, I think you said more than 300, whether it's a state or a county or a township or whatever, have blocked developments. And so we have this collision course where the states keep mandating more and more wind and solar, but the people keep rejecting the projects.
They do, and it's you raise a good point, John, because in fact, I just saw this piece. I was in Columbus, Ohio yesterday, and I pulled this clip, which I think I emailed to you just the other day, but there's a new bill, SB 52, was signed into law by Governor DeWine in Ohio last month that gives Ohio counties the power to veto specific projects, or as the report says, make themselves off limits to renewable energy development altogether. What's interesting about that from a political standpoint, and I say this as a nonpartisan, the legislation was passed without a single Democratic vote. I mean, consider that, right? That somehow the Republicans are sticking up for rural America, but the Democrats aren't. Why is that? But I'll make one other quick point, John, if I could, because the other point that I make in the report for the Center of the American Experiment, and it's a focus of my work at the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity, is the issue of affordability. And what we see in state after state across the country, and province after province, the more renewables get added to a given electric grid, the higher the prices. And California is the prime example of this. And last year alone, electricity prices in California went up 7% in 1 year, and they're going to go a lot higher.
So it seems to me that the real takeaway from your work, Robert, is that you can demand wind and solar, you can mandate wind and solar, you can spend billions and billions and billions of dollars on wind and solar, but it's not going to happen. The land use constraints, we are not going to devote an area the size of 2 Californias to wind turbines. We're not going to build 240,000 miles of transmission lines. I mean, this is a fantasy. But Robert, what dismays me is the wealth that is being destroyed and the costs that are being imposed pursuing this unicorn of green energy.
I agree with you, and it's not just wind. I'll repeat, it's a solar as well. You had just in the last few weeks, a big project, a solar project, was rejected in Pennsylvania. Got a lot of media coverage. Was a massive solar project north of Las Vegas. Was going to be the biggest solar project in the United States, covering 14 square miles. Was canceled. Another one in Butte, Montana. So this is happening all across the country. And so the problems with renewables are many, and the affordability, resilience, reliance on China for critical materials. But we're
out of time, Robert. We're out of time. But thank you so much for being with us on the Dennis Prager Show. I really appreciate it. We'll be back after these messages.
Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
And he says, if you want to convince people to get a vaccine, writes Matt Taibbi, pretty much the worst way to go about it is a massive blame campaign delivered by sneering blue noses who have a richly deserved credibility problem with large chunks of the population and now insist they're owed financially besides. Matt Taibbi says, I'm vaccinated. I think people should be vaccinated. But the latest moral mania we're witnessing, and make no mistake about it, he writes, the pandemic of the unvaccinated PR campaign is the latest in a ceaseless series of such manias dating back to late 2016, lays bare everything that's abhorrent and nonsensical in modern American politics. Isn't that, I think that's such a smart reaction. In fact, those panelists on the Five yesterday were very wisely pointing out, Greg Gutfeld said to Geraldo, if you're trying to be persuasive, buddy, it ain't working. It ain't working. 800-655-Mike. Let's just see how persuasive Geraldo Rivera was. Here's Chris on line 1. Hey, Chris, did Geraldo help you make up your mind about the vaccine?
Totally. Now I'm really pissed off because my sister is a state worker and she doesn't want to get the vaccine, but she has to do it. So I was going to basically get it to help her move on, okay? But after hearing him, I'm not going to do it.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
It's time for the fearless. There's no time for the meek. This is America's moment. What's taking place in our schools, the crime in our cities, all of these things that we can see unraveling this most exceptional nation. It's time for the real believers and the real conservatives to step forward and be absolutely fearless in doing so.
But I think a lot of Americans have woken up, and so we don't even know what is going on the grassroots level because you can't keep track of everything. But I think people are rising up, and they're looking for folks like you and the handful of others in Congress, and they're saying we can no longer do business as usual. But I mean, 10 years ago, you were not thinking like this.
No, you nailed it. You absolutely nailed it. And by the way, I can give you 2 data points from the last 48 hours. I was in southwest Missouri at the Ashcroft family farm. It was a picnic outdoor, poured rain right about an hour before the picnic. Nobody left. They left. They gave me a chance. They gave former Attorney General Ashcroft a chance to talk about the Bible and the America and what we were all going to go do. These people were on fire to take back. And I had people come up and say, I never thought I'd run for city council, and I'm going to do it. And I had a couple law enforcement who said, I didn't have any interest in actually being the sheriff, but our sheriff won't enforce the rules. I'm going to go do that. No, this is different. I was in Iowa at an event that was very similar to that. And people are engaged in their civic life, in their churches, in their community in ways that I have not seen. I've been at this now 9-10 years from the time I first lost my mind and ran for Congress when Obama was the president and we had to throw Nancy out the last time. Who'd have believed we'd have to throw her out of speakership again? But here we are, and this is a moment where our people are being tested, they're being challenged.
Powerline filling in for Dennis today, and we are joined now by Katrin Wigfall, Policy Fellow at Center of the American Experiment. Katrin, thanks for being on the program.
Thanks for having me, John.
Katrin, critical race theory in the last really few months has exploded into one of the top issues nationwide, and you are leading the fight against critical race theory here in Minnesota. Let's just jump in. And first, let me ask you, what is critical race theory?
Well, in a nutshell, it's really just repackaged neo-Marxism. It's this whole idea that we have oppressors versus the oppressed. It pulls from the idea of Marxism that focused on class conflict, and now it's been rebranded as white versus black. It even gets into gender and that sort of thing, and it lumps people into simplistic racial groupings and pits them against each other and says, okay, you have rights as a member of a group, but not as an individual. The number one and most important thing about yourself is your skin color. People of the same racial and ethnicity share common characteristics and traits, and it's extremely divisive and harmful.
Yeah, it's flat out racist, and it seems to me that the real point of it is to be anti-American. What these people are really trying to do is to educate our children to hate their country.
Right. It says that all institutions in America are founded on racism, so it's embedded throughout society. And this has led to calls to tear down these institutions, such as the Western justice system, calls to defund the police, and then replace them with a racial hierarchy in which entire racial groups are either monolithically good or bad. And so it says that America at its core is racist, and therefore it has to be turned over and rooted out.
One of the things that has really triggered the CRT fight here in Minnesota is the promulgation in draft form of new standards for the teaching of social studies in the public schools in Minnesota, K through 12. Talk about that a little bit, what these standards are and how you swung into action to fight them.
Sure. Well, the standards are revised on a 10-year cycle, and this year is social studies' turn. And we really see that it's the latest vehicle from our governor and his Department of Education to replace academic knowledge and skills with the cultivation of politically correct attitudes and commitments to churn out social justice warriors who can't do reading and math, but will be able to identify whether they're an oppressor or part of the oppressed group and how certain groups have been marginalized over the years. And we see these themes continue with the second draft of standards. This draft was released the end of July and paired with a very short public comment period, 2 weeks, intentionally so. It's a 168-page document, but it's just riddled with CRT in action and the framework of CRT that really pulls on three tenets. One, that America's institutions, both all political, legal, and cultural institutions, are permeated by systemic racism, that race determines identity, this idea that we're members of racial groups first and then only individual humans secondarily, and that life is a relentless zero-sum power struggle between racial groups. So again, this dominant versus non-dominant approach. And we see this all the way from the kindergarten benchmarks through high school. And it's very alarming because this is what students will be learning for the next 10 years of their academic career.
It's really amazing because they propose to teach first graders all about racial conflict and race is the most important thing about a person, and the war of the zero-sum war between racial groups. Well, Katrin, you have been leading the effort to block the implementation of these standards, to fight back. We've got just about a minute before the break, but can you describe just briefly how you've been doing that?
Yes. Well, aside from just diving through the document and analyzing it and pulling out themes, we have been bringing this to Minnesotans' attention through a variety of ways. Social media posts, videos, ads saying, are you okay with your child being learned social studies through this lens, through this one-sided perspective? And we have had thousands of Minnesotans submit comments to the Department of Education and the Social Studies Standards Committee and say, no, we oppose students being indoctrinated versus educated. So it's really neat to see Minnesotans get activated at the grassroots level, and I am really pleased to be a part of that.
One of the things that you've done, Katrin, is to pull off a 17-city tour all across the state of Minnesota.
Well, 6 months pregnant at the time.
Well, 6 months pregnant, informing and educating Minnesotans about the threat that is posed by CRT. When we come back from this break, I want to hear about that tour. It's really quite a story. As you know, August is fundraising month for PragerU. With over 5 billion views, PragerU has been educating college and high school students all over the world. And now PragerU is reaching grammar and junior high school kids with new PragerU Kids content. Education got us into this mess. Education is the only way out. We need to support Dennis and his terrific team. This week, your contribution will be matched by a generous donor. So go to PragerU.com to donate or call 833-PragerU. PragerU.com or call 833-PragerU. We are talking with Katrin Wigfall about critical race theory, maybe the hottest topic in America right now. And Katrin, before the break, we mentioned the fact that the organization you and I both work for, Center of the American Experiment, recently conducted a 17-city tour of the state of Minnesota, alerting parents and concerned citizens to the danger posed by critical race theory. Tell our listeners a bit about that tour.
What a whirlwind tour. It was absolutely amazing, though. We got out across the state and had thousands of Minnesotans show up to our events and participate in not only the information that we provided, but then how they can take that to the grassroots level and really get activated at the grassroots level. Because what we have seen across the country is that is where this fight will be won. And so it was really encouraging to see Minnesotans not only get involved, but get empowered and then take that message to others who may or may not be aware of what's going on in our schools and classrooms. So we alerted Minnesotans to the problem, to critical race theory, how it's playing out in classrooms, and then we gave them resources to push back and to stand up for all students. And we were met with a little bit of resistance. We had a couple activist groups try to shut us down and cancel us, but we prevailed. And again, the response to the tour was overwhelmingly positive, and so much so that we're planning a phase 2 of it to kick off later this year.
So I want to talk some more about the reality of critical race theory. You know, if you ask any school administrator in America, I believe, do you teach CRT in your schools? The answer will be no. They always say we don't teach CRT. And how disingenuous is that?
Extremely disingenuous. You're not going to take a legal theory that was used in higher education and teach it to fourth graders. The problem is not teaching about critical race theory. The problem is teaching in critical race theory. And that's what we see playing out in K-12 classrooms. And there are several examples of how CRT's framework, its tenets, and its principles are being put into action. And that real world application piece is so key in our fight against it. I think of a middle school that we have here in Minnesota. There was a school-wide activity at this middle school called a privilege and oppression activity that divided students up.
We're talking about sixth graders here.
Right.
Okay, this is not just one rogue teacher. This is an activity inflicted on all of the sixth graders in this prosperous Twin Cities suburb.
Right, and it divided students into privileged and targeted groups based on their race, sex, gender, religion, and birthplace, and then proceeded to ask students, well, how do you feel about belonging in the oppressed or oppressor group? So pitting students against each other based on these variable and immutable characteristics, it's just absurd.
Yeah, saying to 12-year-olds, how does it feel to be an oppressor? I mean, it's child abuse, frankly.
Right. You're telling students to analyze not only themselves, but then others and the rest of society and the world on the basis of race. And that's an extremely limiting self-conception for a child to have.
What are some other things we've seen here?
Well, we have had books read to students. So fourth graders read a book that warns students that police are mean to black people, but nice to white people. The book says cops stick up for each other, and they don't like black men. There's another book.
Oh, wait, not only don't like them, they shoot them, right?
Oh, right.
This book is a family talking about a black man who's been shot by a police officer.
That's a great point. The book continues because one of the characters asks her sister, well, why did this black man get shot? And the sister says, well, it wasn't a mistake. The cops shot him because he was black. So again, training children to see race first, to fear law enforcement, it's very divisive. I think of another elementary book from a very wealthy school district in Minnesota. The book is called Not My Idea, a book about whiteness. And in the book, it says directly, racism is a white person problem. So again, we have these very alarming materials being read to our students. We see concerning materials coming home in backpacks, and it's very alarming, and parents need to be aware of what's in their students' backpack, what they're discussing in the classroom, and consider whether or not that school environment is the right place for their child to be.
Yeah. So one takeaway, Katrin, is if you go to your school and they say, "Oh no, well, there's no critical race theory in our school," don't take their word for it. Because
right.
Even when they say that, in fact, in the classroom, a lot of this crazy stuff is going on. We've got about about 2 minutes to go before the break here, Katrin. But what are the recommendations that you've been giving to parents and concerned people? What exactly can our listeners do to fight back against CRT?
I think the first part you just noted is making sure that you understand that CRT efforts in schools aren't necessarily going to be called critical race theory. So be aware of euphemisms that are used to describe such efforts, such as equity, diversity and inclusion, anti-racism, and just see how are those words being put into practice. What are school district policies around those words? Parents can get involved then by reviewing curriculum, reviewing textbooks, running for school board, starting a conversation with your child to engage your child and just ask, what are you reading in the classrooms? What are you discussing? Teach your child to recognize what is right and wrong about what's being taught in the classroom. Teach them to trust their instincts. And so we've provided a list of resources for parents to get involved and to get activated, because it is really up to parents at the grassroots level to push back and take a stand.
And I think one thing that you've emphasized at these meetings, Katrin, is that this is not a problem Congress is going to solve for us. It's not even a problem the state legislatures realistically are going to solve. It requires parents to keep an eagle eye on the classroom. And above all, we've got to take control of local school boards. This is a grassroots issue that is being fought school district by school district. And the school boards are absolutely key. We got to run to a break, and we'll be back with more with Katrin Wigfall.
Trending now on the Charlie Kirk Show.
So they're already going to now mandate indoor mask mandates. And in fact, certain sources that cover the White House very well, including Jack Posobiec, who has been wrong about almost nothing with his sources, say that lockdowns are coming to blue states in the next couple weeks. Did you know that 5 people in Washington, D.C. died from COVID in the last week, and 11 people died from homicide? On average, we have 1,800 people that die of heart disease every single day in America. Why are we allowing these people to now get us into another state of panic?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
And then you want it to fit better. So one of the ways you could do it, if you would like to, is put a cloth mask over, which actually here and here and here, where you could get leakage in, is much better contained.
Are you a double masker, Dr. Fauci? It looked like you are.
Now, Alicia, I think, probably has a good reason to reject her doctor's explanation that that's the guy that we should all listen to. Matt Taibbi, in this report, or his column that I saw at New York Post, said, he writes, PolitiFact, which now basically exists to deflect criticism from the Biden administration, rated false the claim that Biden and Harris actually had reservations about the safety of the vaccines.
But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it.
Matt Taibbi says PolitiFact's excuse is that the then candidates, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, were raising questions not about the vaccines themselves, but about then President Donald Trump's rollout of the vaccines.
But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it.
PolitiFact said it's false that Kamala Harris had reservations about the vaccines. Matt Taibbi says, wait a minute, PolitiFact says it's false. What the hell does that mean? That it's okay to have reservations, not just about the White House, but about the CDC, FDA, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Moderna, and every other institution involved with the vaccine effort if you don't like or trust the president?
But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it.
Keep.
A short segment here. Let's go to the phones. Let's start with Kevin in Baltimore on line 3. Kevin, you're on the air.
Hi, John. What prompted me to call? I'm in Maryland. I'm in Baltimore, Maryland. And what prompted me to call was the previous discussion you had on about the wind turbines all over the place. Now, I don't get to Western Maryland that much in Appalachia, but just recently I noticed that there are some erected in Western Maryland and in Appalachia, and there's also, I see frequently, new ones being shipped out I-70, towards Western Maryland to be erected. And I did a comparison of output, which is very simple. It's not rocket science. And it would, for as far as output goes in wattage, it would take 530 of these huge wind turbines to equal the output of one conventional steam-powered turbine. I mean, steam-powered is what, coal, natural gas, nuclear, those are steam-powered. So for one, and we're talking about one turbine in a power plant. So I'm not sure how many these big power plants have, but they certainly have more than one turbine. I mean, they're not that big.
And, the other thing, of course, Kevin, is that the wind turbines only produce the electricity 40% of the time, whereas the power plant produces the electricity all the time. I do want to move on, though, and take a question on CRT. If we go to Patrick in Chicago on line 2. Patrick, have you got a question on CRT?
Yeah, I just wanted you all to listen and hear me out. A few minutes ago, I heard the young lady speak and say that the critical race theory teaches that America was built on racism, and that's just not true when you look at the definition of what critical race theory means. What that means is if you look at every aspect of America when it came to slaves, black people, okay, every policy was racist because we were slaves. What policy was a good policy?
Well, Patrick, there's nobody here in favor of slavery, but Katrin has actually described what is being taught under the rubric of critical race theory, and it is indeed that America is completely racist. We got maybe time for one more call. Let's try Robert in Northwest Georgia on line 1. Robert, you're on the air, and we got just under a minute.
Yes. I came to and experienced that type of reverse racism back in the early 70s while I was at a largely black college in Texas through the summer. That was the summer of the blaxploitation movies as they came out, and we were in those theaters listening to them and listening and feeling that crowd emotion. There is racism in a crowd, but the professional racists now, the Democratic Party, are exploiting it. They are. All right,
we're out of time, and we got to go to a break. Thank you, Katrin, for being with us. We'll be back after these messages.
Oh, shucks. Well...
Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
We have vaccine mandates for federal workers. Nancy Pelosi says masks are back. You're going to be arrested if you don't wear them in Congress. When is this going to end, Phil?
You know, it's I don't know when it's going to end. We've got the masks are mandatory again in Washington, D.C. As of 5 a.m. Tomorrow morning, which is very interesting because it's been 13 days since the District of Columbia last reported a death with COVID. We've had 11 homicides in the last 13 days, but 0 deaths with COVID. And,
maybe they should ban homicides, Phil.
Yeah, right. Well, or at least maybe have a little bit more vigorous enforcement of the existing laws against them.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe today at rumble.com.
Don't you get tired of commercials screaming at you to buy gold now with inflated promises on future values? In an unregulated industry, you need honest, real experts to give you solid advice to protect your wealth and top picks on the best coins and bullion based on real-time data and historical trends. For example, as environmental policy becomes a hot topic, one precious metal that's been significantly undervalued for years is potentially set to surge. Nick Rovich, owner of AmFed Coin and Bullion, has long recommended this precious metal. Up to 600,000 ounces of this rare metal will be needed by 2030 to produce green hydrogen. Nick is doubling down on this pick, and you should too. Call Nick at AmFed Coin and Bullion to find out more. I've been friends with Nick for years, and he's my go-to guy when it comes to coins and bullion. I trust him. He is a good and very knowledgeable man. Call Nick at 800-221-7694, 800-221-7694, AmericanFederal.com, AmericanFederal.com. Not one mistake.
Trending now on the Charlie Kirk Show.
Well, according to the CDC's own documents, right here, Barnstable, or is it Barnstable? Whatever. County, Massachusetts. Outbreak. In all bold. No difference in mean CT values in unvaccinated and vaccinated cases. In fact, the vaccinated cases were 0.4% higher. That's the CDC's own data. That vaccinated Americans in Massachusetts, I'm just reading from the document, in Barnstable County, that the median among vaccinated was N equals 80. I'm not sure what that value represents, but 21.9. Unvaccinated, N equals 65, 21.5. I'm guessing that's how many people they were testing. I need to go look at what the values represent. It says here that risk of infection, reinfection with the Delta variant may be higher compared to the Alpha variant, but only if prior infection is 180 days earlier. It says this, that the Delta variant may cause more severe disease than the Alpha or the ancestral strains. So they're already going to now mandate indoor mask mandates. And in fact, certain sources that cover the White House very well, including Jack Posobiec, who has been wrong about almost nothing with his sources, say that lockdowns are coming to blue states in the next couple weeks.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com.
I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com for Town Hall. Democrats have doubled down on radical indoctrination in schools with their embrace of critical race theory. School boards and teachers unions have rushed to implement CRT into their curricula, in some cases while avoiding parental notification. Even as these education leaders refuse to reopen schools to children, they now plan to use their near monopoly on education to push this highly controversial ideology. It's already begun to backfire. Parents have begun demanding answers from school boards and campaigned to unseat their members. Politico reports that even Democratic voters are repelled by these plans plans, and that the radical efforts have fired up independent and conservative voters. The combination of closures and radical agendas have handed Republicans their best opening in decades. With parents under attack by the education establishment, now is the time to demand comprehensive school choice. The choice between liberty and bureaucratic domination over children is now crystal clear in all demographics and areas. The GOP needs to wake up to this golden opportunity. I'm Ed Morrissey.
Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
And then suddenly people wake up. I never thought it would get this bad this quickly, but it seems that it has taken the madness. Most Americans, if they can finally focus, they just look up and they say, wait a minute. You're telling me the people burning down buildings aren't doing anything wrong. They're peaceful protesters. In other words, your average American who doesn't have a voice the way you do or I do looks around and says, this has gone too far. Madness has been unleashed on the land. I need to do something for my kids, for my grandkids. I thought freedom was a free ride, and I realize now, nope, I'm going to have to, pick up my gun and go to the front lines. Maybe not literally, but it's a similar thing. You realize that everything you held near and dear is being threatened directly. And when your kids are being threatened,
that's it.
You don't care. You're just going to do whatever it takes.
It's about the kids. You know the instinct. You know what the Lord teaches us about parenting. These parents aren't about to take this. They're not allowed. They're not about to allow this to happen in their schools. They may not have seen it because they worked, but I think the combination of having their kids at home during COVID, I think the left's movement, I think the idea somehow that our country was ill-founded, the 1619 Project, this idea that we're racist because we're white, this is something parents are not going to sit back and allow to be propagated. And so it'll take a little time to regain control of these city councils, of these school boards, of these state boards or regions that have allowed our university system to become, right, there's your American university.
Welcome to the Dennis Prager Show. I'm John Hinderaker from Powerline, filling in for Dennis today. And we are pleased to be joined now by Kevin Roche. Kevin is the proprietor of a terrific website called Healthy Skeptic. And if you have not read Healthy Skeptic, you really should. It's one of the best sources for information on all things COVID. Kevin is the former general counsel of the United Health Group, one of America's biggest health companies. He then founded and ran the Ingenix, now Optum Insight division of United Health. And since leaving that company, Kevin has worked as an investor, a legal and business advisor, and consultant in healthcare, including as a founder of Roche Consulting, and is on the boards of numerous healthcare companies. Kevin, thanks for being on the program.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Kevin, this is like a horror film, right? I mean, just when we thought COVID was done, over, kaput, the masks are off, and so on, here comes the Delta variant. What is the story with the Delta variant?
Yeah, I think we've seen several of these variants arise in the course of the epidemic, which isn't unusual, especially with a respiratory virus. I think most people are probably at least vaguely familiar with the fact that the flu virus has several strains in circulation at any time and regularly kind of mutates into different versions of the flu. So it's not really unusual to see that. We seem to have a basic mentality in regard to this epidemic that anything that happens is really bad, and it sort of sparks a new wave of panic, even hysteria about what's going to happen, and that's definitely been the case with the Delta variant. And the reality is very different from the picture people get. The
best data that I think we have right now comes from the UK, which does an excellent job of gathering and reporting data. The Delta variant now is basically 100% of cases in the UK, and it's been that way for several weeks. And they put out a series of briefs that cover all of the what are called variants of concern, including Delta. And if you read through those briefs, what becomes very apparent is that Delta is not as dangerous. It does not appear, even if you look at unvaccinated people versus vaccinated people, it does not appear to result in as serious an illness in terms of either hospitalization or death rates. And it's not clear to me that it's even that much more transmissible. So, unfortunately, I think any of these developments for some people become an opportunity to, frankly, start another wave of alarmism, another wave of restrictions that are almost always completely futile and ineffective in slowing transmission. So I think, unfortunately, that's kind of the situation we find ourselves in now.
Kevin, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is typical, isn't it? In other words, viruses mutate. We know that. That's no surprise. And they tend to mutate in ways that make them less threatening, less lethal. And I think the reason for that is that the virus doesn't want to kill you. It's bad for the virus if you die. The virus wants you to live. So what we're seeing here is really pretty typical, isn't it?
I think in general it is. I think, viruses vary in their inherent kind of ability to cause serious illness. It's not completely clear to me. This one may have a little more likelihood of causing serious illness than the typical flu virus does, certainly in the elderly. And it is definitely true that in general, viruses, especially new viruses introduced to a population, tend to mutate toward something that creates an equilibrium. So the virus becomes what's referred to as endemic, which means it's always there. There's kind of a background rate of infections. There's some degree of serious illness, but not a super high burden. And frankly, we all just kind of learn to live with them. That's the case with flu. I don't think anybody would seriously talk about trying to suppress or eliminate flu, partly because we all recognize it's not possible, and I believe that's the situation we're in with coronavirus as well.
Right now, Kevin, there's a lot of controversy about vaccination. I was one of the first to get vaccinated. I thought, great, I'm done. That's it. But now there's a lot of controversy. So I guess one basic question is, what do the data show? Does vaccination work to keep you from getting this disease or not?
Yeah, I think the kind of background issue is really how poorly the public was educated about what the likely effect of a vaccine would be, and unrealistic expectations were almost created. You'll recall that we had lots of politicians and even some public health experts kind of saying, once the vaccines are out there, it's over. You don't have to wear your mask anymore. You can go back to a normal life and everything. And now we're seeing that the reality, at least in terms of the response from the politicians and the public health leaders, is different. And again, it kind of goes back to what would you expect from a vaccine for a respiratory virus. I think people are also generally familiar with the fact that the flu vaccines have some effectiveness, but they don't keep people from getting infected, in some cases seriously ill and dying. So the expectation should have been set, I think, that the vaccines would definitely have an impact. They would slow transmission. They would not prevent people, especially people with weakened immune systems, like the frail elderly, that it would not stop those people from being infected and in some cases even getting sick and dying. So I've said to people it would be my expectation that if you took a fully vaccinated population, everybody's vaccinated, that you would see an age structure of the epidemic, the proportions of people in different age groups who are getting infected, getting hospitalized, and dying, that would look just like the one before anybody was vaccinated, but the absolute numbers would be much lower. And I think that's where we're headed. I think the data shows pretty clearly at this point that the vaccines do work very effectively to reduce hospitalizations and to reduce deaths. We saw that in the UK in the most recent wave. We see it in Florida now. We're seeing it in Minnesota. There's always a question about the length of the immune response that's created. There are questions about the effectiveness of a vaccine against mutations or new strains, and we're seeing some modest reduction in effectiveness against Delta, but I believe the vaccines are doing the job that you would have realistically expected them to do, and I think they can be clearly improved, and an example of that would be the messenger RNA vaccines, Moderna and Pfizer, were developed solely using the spike protein to prompt an immune response. A natural infection will typically prompt a response to multiple components of the virus. The spike protein portion of the virus is one of the portions that mutates most frequently, and it's where mutations tend to be more threatening because that's the vehicle that the virus uses to get entries to cells. So I would expect in a second-generation vaccine that we would hopefully see the manufacturers begin to mimic what happens in a natural infection. Because now we're seeing studies suggest...
Hey, Kevin, we're up against a break, and I want to pursue that question that you've just raised there in more detail.
Sure.
So we're going to be right back after these messages with Kevin Roche.
Here at Salem Media Group, we're delighted to welcome you back to your old habits and haunts. Nice to see you at our restaurants. We've been waiting a long time for you to return. Nice to see you at the salon, the post office, the flower shop. Nice to see you back in the office. Nice to see all those cars on the freeway again.
Yay! Hello, Bedford Falls!
For over a year, America has been fighting to get back to normal. This Salem radio station has been fighting right alongside you. Now we're back. You're back. It feels so good to be back.
Welcome back to the real.
Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
And I know so many people who are resistant to the vaccine. It's just a fact of life. And there are people in all walks of life, white people, black people, Hispanic people, members of the military, the healthcare profession. You know how many nurses, and dare I say doctors, physician's assistants, unwilling to get the vaccine? It's more than a little. So what do we do with them? What do we do with those people? In fact, that's been one of the most unreported stories of the whole crisis of this pandemic. Healthcare workers who are unvaccinated.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on the Larry Elder Show.
Stephen, let's pretend like you were president for a day. What do we do to get this economy back in shape?
So the first thing we do is we actually do exactly think of everything Biden has done and do exactly the opposite. And I'm not kidding, Carl. I mean, we do exactly the opposite of what Biden is doing. We don't need $4 trillion of spending right now. We need to be, after a crisis is over, and COVID is basically over now thanks to Trump and the vaccine, usually after like World War II or after the Cold War, we actually cut spending. We need to be aggressively cutting government spending. By the way, government spending, you know this, Carl, where did this crazy idea come from that government spending stimulates? All the government spending stimulates is government. It doesn't. The only way, let me put it very simply, because this is really important. I know you know this as a businessman. The only way that the government can give you $1,000 is to take $1,000 away from me, right? It's a zero-sum game, and all we're doing is taking money away from producers and giving it to people who don't produce. That's a formula for disaster.
You know what? It's so funny that you mention that. I talk about that often on my show, and one of the things, it's frustrating to hear Biden talk about it, but it's even more, it's scary to me that people believe it, that there's such a lack of understanding when it comes to economics that it completely baffles me. It completely scares me that he could say the things that he says about inflation and just completely get away with it.
Now think about somebody like Joe Biden. What has Joe Biden done in his life? Well, he's never had a job. I mean, all he's done, he's been in government his whole life.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
And the whole point of it was to do comedy from a Christian conservative perspective that wasn't cheesy, that didn't make us the joke. Because
isn't it funny that we always have to start there?
Yeah,
we're doing it. It's really brilliant, but it's not cheesy.
Right.
Like we're making films, but it's not cheesy. It's a TV program, but it's not cheesy.
We do.
Welcome back. We are talking with Kevin Roche about all things COVID. We've got a couple of calls I'm going to try to get to this segment. But Kevin, I want to start by picking up on something that you were saying at the end of the last segment about the natural immunity that is conferred by actually having the disease in comparison to the immunity that is conferred by getting vaccinated. And there's a lot of controversy about this right now, with some people saying even if you've had the disease, nevertheless you got to get the vaccine. What's the story on that? Does having the disease give you as good protection as being vaccinated?
As far as I can tell from the research, it does. And it gives you, in some ways, a broader protection. Unfortunately, we're not getting a lot of good data out of either the states or the CDC that would help. It would be incredibly useful, for example, to have comparisons of rates of what are referred to as breakthrough infections, hospitalizations, deaths in the vaccinated population compared to reinfection rates in people who had a previous coronavirus infection and presumably developed an adaptive immune response from that. I think if we had good studies comparing those two populations, it would be helpful. The evidence that we have and some of the studies looking directly at antibody responses certainly appears to suggest that natural infection is at least as good and potentially better, again, because it tends to have a broader response. I think the hesitation about relying on it is almost a logistical one. It's pretty easy to tell people to carry around a vaccine card. It's a little harder to have large numbers of people get antibody tests and have to carry around a card that says, I have an antibody test that shows that I have an adaptive immune response. Some people have suggested just using a positive test for that purpose, and that might be a little easier. I think it also reflects an incorrect bias among some in the public health community to believe that vaccination is better than infection. But again, I just don't think the research supports that at this point.
Let's try a phone call or two. Let's start with David in San Francisco on line 5. David, you're on the air. Have you got a COVID question?
Yeah, I sure did. And first of all, I'd wonder what organization sent him out into the world to spout such nonsense. The other is, he said that the mortality rate for the new variants is low, so it's as if we don't need to worry about it. Now, how can that be? These are brand new. You'd have no stats because it's too new to have statistics. And
all right, let's hold that thought, David. Let's go to Kevin. Kevin, what statistics have we got on the Delta variant?
Well, I and I always do this on the blog. I link to everything that I cite. I show people data information sources, and I give them links to the actual research studies. I would encourage the gentleman to go look at the UK technical brief on variants of concern, and if he has a rudimentary understanding of statistics, if he looks at the tables and graphs, he will see that it's very clear right there that the hospitalization rate and the death rate is lower, and saying that it's too new and we don't have data is just flat out wrong. This variant has been around for quite a while. As I said, it's been the dominant variant in England for months, so they have a very large number of cases with experience of the Delta variant.
All right, David, thanks for that call. Let's go to Mike in Detroit on line 6. Mike, welcome to the program.
Oh, hello. Yeah, people kind of forget that President Trump developed these vaccines to meet an emergency, to protect the most vulnerable members of our society, and that was accomplished. Now, I believe that he would have, hit pause, put together some sort of committee or organization to reevaluate the situation, decide which patient population this vaccine is appropriate for and which patient population it is contraindicated in. And that's what needs to happen. But we have a new regime that is shamelessly exploiting this politically. And then we have, say, eight new billionaires in big pharma and all these economic interests that seem to be more interested in keeping these extra constitutional and extra emergency measures, even institutionalize them.
All right. Hey, good, Mike. Mike, I think we get where you're coming from. Kevin, any comment on that?
Yeah, I think there is a misunderstanding about the nature of the authorization for the vaccines, and it's probably because the FDA regulation of any kind of therapeutic product is very complex. But the emergency authorization basically occurred because of a matter of timing, and it really didn't involve sort of significant shortcuts, which is what I think people have been concerned about. There were very large trials conducted, and there is very significant ongoing monitoring of the performance of the vaccines by the FDA and its advisory committees. Those committees have already, in the case of a couple of the vaccines, put additional warnings onto them. And I think shortly here we're going to get the full authorizations for them, and we'll see what the FDA requires on the labeling at that point. But they did go through a very significant development process with regulatory oversight that has continued, and so I have a pretty good level of confidence in the process by which they were approved.
Kevin, let me ask you this. First of all, can we keep you for one more segment after the next break? We got about a minute and a half to go before the break.
Sure.
Okay, terrific. The next thing I want to ask you about is masks. And I'll tell you, Kevin, I didn't mind getting vaccinated, whatever. But I really, really don't like wearing masks and seeing everybody else wearing masks. At this point, is there any scientific justification for telling us to mask up?
I don't think so. I think, John, I regularly kind of mock the what I refer to as the mask religion. And it would take an extended kind of explanation for all of the reasons why I think we don't see an impact. And the clearest way to say that we don't see an impact is, frankly, to look at epidemic curves. And when you see the kind of curves that you see with incredibly sharp and steep rises in cases, I just, I find it almost ludicrous for people to say, well, masks make a difference. And Japan right now is a great example of that.
Hey, hold that example until after the break, Kevin. We're going to come right back, and we'll follow up on that after these messages.
Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
We have vaccine mandates for federal workers. Nancy Pelosi says masks are back. You're going to be arrested if you don't wear them in Congress. When is this going to end, Phil?
It's I don't know when it's going to end. We've got the masks are mandatory again in Washington, D.C. As of 5 a.m. Tomorrow morning, which is very interesting because it's been 13 days since the District of Columbia last reported a death with COVID. We've had 11 homicides in the last 13 days, but 0 deaths with COVID. And,
maybe they should ban homicides, Phil.
Yeah, right. Well, or at least maybe have a little bit more vigorous enforcement of the existing laws against them.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe today at rumble.com.
Don't you get tired of commercials screaming at you to buy gold now with inflated promises on future values? In an unregulated industry, you need honest, real experts to give you solid advice to protect your wealth and top picks on the best coins and bullion based on real-time data and historical trends. For example, as environmental policy becomes a hot topic, one precious metal that's been significantly undervalued for years is potentially set to surge. Nick Rovich, owner of AmFed Coin and Bullion, has long recommended this precious metal. Up to 600,000 ounces of this rare metal will be needed by 2030 to produce green hydrogen. Nick is doubling down on this pick, and you should too. Call Nick at AmFed Coin and Bullion to find out more. I've been friends with Nick for years, and he's my go-to guy when it comes to coins and bullion. I trust him. He is a good and very knowledgeable man. Call Nick at 800-221-7694, 800-221-7694, AmericanFederal.com, AmericanFederal.com. Not one mistake.
Trending now on the Charlie Kirk Show.
Well, according to the CDC's own documents, right here, Barnstable, or is it Barnstable? Whatever. County, Massachusetts. Outbreak. In all bold. No difference in mean CT values in unvaccinated and vaccinated cases. In fact, the vaccinated cases were 0.4% higher. That's the CDC's own data. That vaccinated Americans in Massachusetts, I'm just reading from the document, in Barnstable County, that the median among vaccinated was N equals 80. I'm not sure what that value represents, but 21.9. Unvaccinated, N equals 65, 21.5. I'm guessing that's how many people they were testing. I need to go look at what the values represent. It says here that risk of infection reinfection with the Delta variant may be higher compared to the Alpha variant, but only if prior infection is 180 days earlier. It says this, that the Delta variant may cause more severe disease than the Alpha or the ancestral strains.
Dennis Prager invites you to join Mike Gallagher and Dennis for a 10-day tour in and through the land of Israel this fall. Come along with Salem Media Group and the travel partner Inspiration Cruises and Tours to get first-hand experience in the Holy Land. Israel is opening up to travelers as the country gets back to normal. Dennis is excited to return to Israel and wants you to join him from October 27 to November 5th. You can walk ancient pathways, experience key historical and political sites, sail on the Sea of Galilee, and much more. It will be 10 days of unforgettable memories. This is the year to tour the Holy Land. The travel partner has a team on hand to answer your questions about deposits, health and safety, and what is required to enter the country. Together, we are making every effort to make this the best tour ever. To register, call at 855-565-5519 or book conveniently online at standwithisraeltour.com. That's standwithisraeltour.com. We are talking with Kevin Roche about all things COVID. And Kevin, before the break, we were talking about masks, and you were saying that you don't think that the scientific evidence supports mask wearing at this point, mask mandates. And you mentioned Japan. What does the Japanese experience tell us?
Well, I think, again, I would encourage people to do something very basic. You can go to Worldometers or John Hopkins website, number of sources you can go to. I've actually printed a version of the chart on the website and just look at the epidemic curve and what you see right now in a country where 99% plus of the population routinely wears masks. Is an epidemic curve that, every now and then people say to me, well, maybe it'd be worse if people weren't wearing masks, and I just say, look at the steepness of that line and tell me how it could be worse. And I think we've seen that repeatedly. So that's kind of macro evidence to me that it doesn't have a significant impact. The other thing that's very notable to me is typically in healthcare, when we try to gauge the efficacy of an intervention of some type, and putting a mask on someone to supposedly stop the transmission of a disease is an intervention, we usually expect to see kind of randomized control trials to show that the intervention actually works. Otherwise, why would you do it? The one randomized control trial in the community, which is what we're talking about here, trying to assess the efficacy of masks, is a pretty large study that was done in Denmark. The authors were blackballed from getting it published for quite some time, but they eventually got it published, and it showed no benefit. And I think there's underlying science that explains that. Just this week, there was a paper out of Singapore which looking at actual viral loads and the composition of those loads in patients during talking, breathing, singing, showed that almost all of the virus is emitted in the form of very small aerosols, very fine kind of particles that the virus rides on. Those particles are not effectively blocked by a mask. They're easily steered into gaps. I've joked and called masks virus collection devices, but there's also a piece of research out of the United Kingdom's Public Health Agency that shows that
viruses live longer on masks of all the surfaces that they tested than all but one surface, and that they persisted in a viable form for almost 24 hours. So, you know, you have to think about what's actually happening. What's happening is that as you both breathe in and breathe out, you're depositing a variety of things, including pathogens, on that mask. And if you wear it for an extended period of time, you know, you're literally collecting that, and it will find a way to get either through the mask or around the mask. So that's why I think, you know, when you see the curves that kind of tell you they're not working, there's also some science and some physical explanation that explains why that would be the case.
Kevin O'Shea, thank you so much for being with us. It's been very educational. One last question. We got 15 seconds. Masks are bad enough. Do you see any risk of a return to shutdowns?
I think there's always a risk. I think there's always a risk with some of the people we have running things.
Ouch. We're going to run to a break. Be back with more after these messages. Kevin?
Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
Stephen, let's pretend like you were president for a day. What do we do to get this economy back in shape?
So the first thing we do is we actually do exactly think of everything Biden has done and do exactly the opposite. And I'm not kidding, Carl. I mean, we do exactly the opposite of what Biden is doing. You know, we don't need $4 trillion of spending right now. We need to be, after a crisis is over, and COVID is basically over now thanks to Trump and the vaccine, usually after like World War II or after the Cold War, we actually cut spending. We need to be aggressively cutting government spending. By the way, government spending, you know this, Carl, where did this crazy idea come from that government spending stimulates? All the government spending stimulates is government. It doesn't. The only way, let me put it very simply, because this is really important. I know you know this as a businessman. The only way that the government can give you $1,000 is to take $1,000 away from me, right? It's a zero-sum game, and all we're doing is taking money away from producers and giving it to people who don't produce. That's that formula for disaster.
You know what? It's so funny that you mention that. I talk about that often on my show, and one of the things, it's frustrating to hear Biden talk about it, but it's even more, it's scary to me that people believe it, that there's such a lack of understanding when it comes to economics that it completely baffles me. It completely scares me that he could say the things that he says about inflation and just completely get away with it.
Now think about somebody like Joe Biden. What has Joe Biden done in his life? Well, he's never had a job. I mean, all he's done, he's been in government his whole life.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
And the whole point of it was to do comedy from a Christian conservative perspective that wasn't cheesy, that didn't make us the joke. Because
isn't it funny that we always have to start there?
Yeah,
we're doing it. It's really brilliant, but it's not cheesy.
Right?
Like we're making films, but it's not cheesy. It's a TV program, but it's not cheesy.
That we do that's cheesy,
and it is an amazing thing. I said it before, but you guys, it's not just not cheesy. It's brilliant, and actually, in the world in which we live today, it's almost the only stuff that's happening at that level. I mean, there's nothing on the left.
Well, I can tell you why.
To it.
The reason there's nothing good on the left right now, and I know I've followed The Onion for years. They've been around for 20 plus years. They used to be very funny. They're less funny now, and they're less funny now for a very good reason. You know, the left has made all these rules about what you can and can't say, and they also have this idea that you can't offend anybody.
Right.
So in enforcing these rules, they even do this on comedians. They try to make comedians follow rules. You can't say this, you can't say that, you can't joke about this, you can't offend this people group, you can't punch down, never punch down.
Right.
And so they make all these rules, and comedians, by their nature, flout rules. They make fun of people who make rules. That's what comedians are supposed to do, right? That's really their role in all of this. And so to handcuff comedians in that way, leftists are actually by trying to kill comedy and strangle it, they're creating an opportunity for people on the other side of the aisle to say the things that you're not supposed to say, make the jokes you're not supposed to make.
It's fascinating to me to see people who might previously have identified as on the left or something pushing back against the cancel culture and the absurdity of this, because they usually the ones who are doing that with the
Take a look at your cell phone bill. If you're with Verizon, AT&T, or T-Mobile, you're paying too much. Dennis wants you to switch to Pure Talk. Pure Talk can save your family over $800 a year. Yes, same great coverage because Pure Talk is on the exact same network as one of the big three, but at a fraction of the price. And switching is as easy as switching out your SIM card. You can keep your phone, keep your number, or get huge discounts on the latest iPhones and Androids. Dennis got the iPhone 12 and he loves it. Plus, right now, get unlimited talk, text, and 6 gigs of data for just $30 a month. And if you go over on data, they don't charge you for it. There's a reason Pure Talk is the highest rated wireless company by Consumer Affairs, why they're the preferred wireless partner of AMAC. From your cell phone, dial pound 250 and say Dennis Prager and save an additional 50% off your first month. That's pound 250, say Dennis Prager. Well, we're back for the last couple of segments here on the Dennis Prager Show. We've got a caller who's been holding, and that is Sarah in Denver. So let's see what is on Sarah's mind. Sarah, welcome to the program.
Yes, hi. I was listening shortly ago, and you had mentioned that this vaccine has gone through extensive trials with a large group of, of people, and I don't believe that that is true. COVID itself has only been around for about 19 months. This vaccine has been around, quote unquote, for about a year. We have zero long-term safety data on this, and I just don't understand how anyone can say that we can skip an entire year of normal vaccine trials.
Sarah, we lost you there, but I think Sarah had made her point. Let me just comment on it because I'm sympathetic to what she says. Our guest, we've lost our guest, Kevin O'Shea, and he's the one who would have been able to cite chapter and verse about how extensively tested these vaccines have been, how many trials and so on. I can't give you those numbers off the top of my head. I do know that they have been tested in ways that are considered extensive and were acceptable to the Food and Drug Administration. But I also understand Sarah's point. They haven't been around for a long time. And we don't have a lot of practical experience. I've got a daughter right now who's pregnant with twins. And so she faced the question, should she get the vaccine? Because, they don't have studies on pregnant women to my knowledge. And so there is a certain element of a leap of faith. I think that the experience with the vaccines so far has been positive, but I can understand why there are some people, and I think Sarah's in this category, who say, look, I don't have total confidence in the vaccine, and I'm not 85 years old and frail and suffering from multiple comorbidities. I'm willing to take my chances. Yeah. Our producer just says that as of today, CDC has come out and said pregnant women should get the vaccine. And, maybe you have full confidence in the CDC and maybe you don't. But I really understand why there are some people out there who say, you know what? I'm not that scared of COVID-19. I'm really not, respiratory viruses for a young, healthy person don't tend to be that severe. I would just as soon take my chances with the disease as take my chances with the vaccine. No, that's not the decision that I made. I got vaccinated. But I understand that there are some people out there who worry about side effects and other things. I have a friend right now who's been very sick for a couple of weeks, started immediately after getting vaccinated. Maybe it's a coincidence. I don't know. But I understand the concern, and I guess the point I would make is I don't think that anybody should get forced to get vaccinated. And I don't think that anybody's employment should depend on getting vaccinated. I remember the old slogan, "My body, my choice." The liberals seem to have forgotten that line, which they made famous years ago, and it's not your choice anymore. At least that's the way they're trying to make it. So I hope that answers your question, Sarah. I personally have got a lot of confidence in the vaccines, but I understand that not everyone does, and I do think that at the end of the day, this is a matter of personal choice. All right, we've got just a little time left in today's show. I want to talk in the few minutes remaining about what to me is kind of a sad story, and that has to do with a TV show called Ted Lasso. If you're not familiar with it, Ted Lasso is on Apple TV. And it finished up a very successful first season and is now in the second season. And the show is about a guy, Ted Lasso, who is a football coach in the United States who got hired to coach a soccer team in England, even though he knows little about soccer. And they're kind of copying the plot of Major League because the woman who owns the soccer team wants to see them lose to spite her ex-husband and thinks hiring this incompetent coach will help to achieve that. Well, as you can imagine, things don't go that badly. And the trademark of the show really is that this guy, this coach Ted Lasso, is a really, really nice guy. And people like the show, and for him at least, being a nice guy really seems to work and to be effective. It's a funny show. The star of the show, I guess, is a pretty well-known guy. Used to be on Saturday Night Live. I wouldn't know about that. But it's a good program. So my wife and I look forward quite eagerly to the second season of Ted Lasso, which was fine up until episode 3. And then in episode 3, the show went woke. The team that Lasso coaches is sponsored by Air Dubai. And one of their star players suddenly said that he was going to put tape over the Air Dubai logo on his jersey because he's learned that Air Dubai is a subsidiary of an oil company that has polluted Nigeria, which is where he comes from. And so in this kind of inspiring scene, all the other players say, "Oh, that's terrible," and they all cover up the Air Dubai logos on their jerseys. Why don't I like that? Well, I'll explain when we come back from these messages.
Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
We've had 11 homicides in the last 13 days,
Yep.
But 0 deaths with COVID. And,
Maybe they should ban homicides, Phil.
Yeah, right. Well, or at least maybe have a little bit more vigorous enforcement of the existing laws against them. But look, I mean, it's just completely bizarre. You know, I looked up the most recent percentage of emergency room visits. They post every couple of days that had COVID in the District of Columbia, and it was 0.25%, which has got to be like one person, basically, that showed up at an emergency room. And, but the CDC says mask. The Democratic mayor says absolutely, we're on board. A couple days later, it comes into effect, and they, I expect other liberal areas will follow suit because there doesn't need to be any basis in the metrics of the data or the facts of the science. The play.
So let's talk about this for a second. So can you confirm or deny, or do you have any other visibility that apparently this insane reversal we've been told by Biden, by Fauci, if you're vaccinated, you don't need a mask. Now you do, perhaps for the rest of eternity. That this decision is based apparently on an unpublished, unpeer-reviewed publication from India about a vaccine that you can't even get here in America.
And it's actually even better than that because they didn't even understand the study, because in the CDC slide deck, they refer to it as a study in healthcare professionals when in fact it was a study in simulated persons in a laboratory. It was not a study in actual human beings.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe today at rumble.com. Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
So they're already going to now mandate indoor mask mandates. And in fact, certain sources that cover the White House very well, including Jack Posobiec, who has been wrong about almost nothing with his sources, say that lockdowns are coming to blue states in the next couple weeks. Did you know that 5 people in Washington, D.C. died from COVID in the last week, and 11 people died from homicide? On average, we have 1,800 people that die of heart disease every single day in America. Why are we allowing these people to now get us into another state of panic?
Before the break, I was talking about Ted Lasso, a really terrific Apple TV production. Last year was terrific anyway, that went woke in the 3rd episode as these players protest against their own sponsor, Air Dubai, in the Emirates, because they found out that Air Dubai is owned by an oil company that polluted Nigeria. Now, this is so hackneyed, so stale, the big bad oil company as the villain. And of course, the truth is that the oil companies have done more to advance humanity. They've done more for humanity than all the liberals and all the leftists in the world put together. But they didn't have to invent this fictional oil company to give these athletes something to protest against. I mean, they could have protested against Dubai. Dubai is a very conservative country ruled under a strict Islamic code. You can go to jail in Dubai for kissing in public. You can be criminally prosecuted in Dubai for sexting. There was one guy who went to jail in Dubai because he had smoked marijuana legally somewhere else, and then several days later, a trace of it was found in his urine in Dubai, and they put him in jail. Now, I think that if these soccer players wanted to protest these kinds of draconian laws and this kind of oppression in Dubai, their actual sponsor, that would have made more sense than inventing this fictitious oil company. But there's something else, too. There's something else. If they really wanted to be courageous, and of course the point of this episode is, oh, look at these brave soccer players sticking it in the eye of their corporate sponsor. Well, if they really wanted to be courageous, how about if they stuck it in the eye of Apple? There are credible reports that a number of components of Apple products are made with forced labor, or not to be too subtle about it, slave labor by Uyghurs in China. Credible reports of that. And we know that Apple actually lobbied on a statute in Congress that was proposed called the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. Well, it doesn't say what side they lobbied on, but I don't think they were for it, given their history of labor conditions in China. And so if the writers and producers and actors and so on, if they really wanted to be brave, they could have stuck a finger in the eye of their own sponsor, Apple. But needless to say, that didn't even occur to them. So what we're seeing here is cheap virtue and fake activism, which is really the essence of being woke. It's what we see every time. So with that, I'm going to sign off. John Hinderaker from Powerline. It's been fun to be with you. Hope to be back again before too long.